So I said 10 minutes past 5, so we will start. Thank you for choosing this panel discussion on the topic of acquire, destroy, or cooperate, love-hate relationship between startups and corporations. So it's a long topic, but in general, the theme that we want to discuss is something that we've heard throughout the whole day, like working for a corporation, starting a startup, working in startup, being a startup, selling to a big company. So there are a lot of topics we can touch on. I think we somehow will kick it off and then have your questions ready in your head, and there will be time where you can ask anything. They're strange that most of the startups, they want to grow, they want to be big, they want to be huge, so they want to become a corporation. On the other hand, nowadays, many of the corporations, they want to be like startups, having the innovative culture, feeling like startups, working in them. So there is this strange conflict, and we want to explore this topic with you guys, because we have Hizam from iflix, we have Cedric from StartupYard, we have Robert from AXA Czech Republic and Slovakia, and we will have Anne hopefully in a moment. So in the beginning, I would ask you guys if you can shortly introduce yourself and the company that you're representing here today.
Should I start?
Yeah.
So iflix, the easiest way to start introducing iflix is to bring up Netflix, as it sounds similar. The value proposition is also quite similar. It's a subscription video on demand. You pay one fixed amount of fee monthly, and you get unlimited content to enjoy TV shows and movies. Having said that, the business model, the strategy, etc. is very, very different. Netflix focuses in developed countries. iflix is focusing in emerging markets such as Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East, Latin America, even as far as Eastern Europe. So that's pretty much who we are. We are very, very young. We're 3 years old. We've managed to get our business out in about 20 different countries now, and we have about 5 million paying subscribers, and our aspiration is to redefine television for 1 billion users across the entire emerging market around the world. So that is iflix.
Thank you. Cedric.
Thank you. So background about myself, 25 years ago I graduated as an engineer in artificial intelligence. Before it was cool, nowadays it's super cool to do that. But I spent the last 20 years building startups, technology startups. So I'm a total geek who's been doing business for the past 20 years. And 3 years ago, I became the CEO of StartupYard. StartupYard is an accelerator. So let me just clarify something, because you've heard of incubators, you've heard of accelerators, right? So it's like Coca-Cola and Coca-Cola, not the same thing. An incubator is more like a glorified co-working space, and incubators are great because you can sit there and spend your life working. And an accelerator is an investment program. So that's what we do. We have a 3-month investment program where we select startup, we receive application, and we select them, and we invest in them with cash and in kind, and we work with them, and we try to make them bigger, stronger, faster, more successful. Just right now, we're in the middle of our program number 8. For that program, we received 160 applications from around the world, like literally around the world. We selected 7 startups. 2 of them are from the Czech Republic, 2 of them are from the UK, 1 is from Slovakia, 1 is from Poland, and 1 is from Georgia. But we did receive US applications, South American, and we accelerate them, we help them, we connect them to potential investors, to potential customers, and we work very hard with them on finding the right employees, finding the right business model. So if you have a startup and you want help, you should really look at accelerators. You don't have to look at StartupYard. Of course you should, because we're really good, but you don't have to. When I started my career as an entrepreneur, there was no accelerators. So I did everything on my own, like my other friends back then. And I can tell you that there is a difference between before and after an accelerator. So I'm going to stop here for the moment.
Cool. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you today. So I'm supposed to be the corporate guy. So my name is Robert Gaucci. I'm the CEO of AXA for Czech Republic and Slovakia. But before going into more details about AXA, I will tell you a personal story I had when I started my career. I was working for another multinational company, and I was sent from my French boss to a local subsidiary we had in Italy with a mission to create a new business line. The problem is that the boss locally didn't believe in this business line. So I was the guy who was hated, young, wanted to create something, and this boss, the general manager of this entity, told me, okay, you do what you want, I don't care, in 6 months you are back home. So I had to develop my business with no resources, with no one, and I had basically 2.5 people working with me, trying to create what we used to call creditor protection insurance, whatever. And this was a success. You know why it was a success? Because I was left alone, with no procedures, with no corporate strong rules that would have made it much more complicated to do pilots, to test new things. And I was able to grow this business. And once my former boss saw some zeros after the budget, he told me, okay, now you're invited in the ExCom, you're invited in the management committee. And so when I started entering into the corporate processes, this was more difficult, it's true. But now that the prototype demonstrated to be working, it also was a great accelerator because I had funding, I had capacity, I had resources. So the timing was good. And the fact that I tell you this story is because I strongly believe that there is no frontier between the startup spirit and the corporate spirit, and I think both are complementary. So my personal life, I'm originally from France. I spent 17 years in Italy, some years in France with a regional job overseeing Western Europe and seeing different business models. And I have the chance and the honor to be here in Czech Republic, overseeing Czech Republic and Slovakia, which is a great market. I believe we have lots of things to do, to test, to try, and also to innovate here. So AXA in Czech Republic and Slovakia is roughly 2,000 people, 500 employees, 1,500, I would say, collaborators, which are agents primarily. And we distribute all type of insurance products, from life, savings, protection, pension, property and casualty, motor insurance, household, everything needed by our client to make sure his life is easier, to make sure he feels secure. So the key vision is that we should listen to what the customer really needs so that his life becomes easier. So this is our mission. So just to give you an idea, 600 million collected premium last year, roughly 20 million profit, and we will grow. And we will grow also because we work with startups.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys. My name is Anne Hofvander. I work for Creative Doc, and I'm not always chronically late. Creative Doc is a company that builds startups, and we do it on behalf of corporations. And so corporations who have difficulty innovating internally will ask us to do it as a way of accelerating the process of bringing new ideas and new companies to the market. I've been with Creative Doc for 3 years, but have a long history with the founder, Martin Pesha, who's sorry he couldn't be here today. He actually used to work for me at Oscar. For those of you who remember Oscar, I come from a corporate background in telecom and spent a lot of years, 10 years, working for first Oscar, then Vodafone when we got bought out, and then I went to India and worked for Telenor and launching Telenor in India. And after that experience, I decided that I didn't like telco very much anymore. It was really fun during the Oscar years, but it was becoming a commodity, and spending my time fighting politics and justifying a 0.01% drop in a metric that really didn't matter. I just had enough of it. And so I moved into the startup world, first with a company in Sweden, and then coming here and helping Martin out with Creative Doc. And what I do at Creative Doc is I run it together with him. And we interchange a lot between the two of us. So running it means I support all of the projects, all of the people, as well as all of the back office functions.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. So you see, it's a vast expertise on this podium, so we can really dig into the topic. And 10 years ago, I remember for my colleagues at this university, the aim was to go to a big four, like being consultants. That was the main goal for many of my colleagues. 5 years ago, it was corporation or having your own startup. Now having your own company is quite cool, and it's a career path for many of students, or at least a dream to have their own startup. And I understand the interest of startups to corporations, because Robert illustrated it. Corporation, they have a lot of money. Startups need to sell to someone, so there I understand this relation. What I don't understand is the interest of corporation to startups. I assume in West it was many years ago. In Czech Republic is kind of a recent development that I see on the market. So why do you think that big companies are suddenly interested in startups? Yes, Cedric, I saw it. Yes, of course you can.
I want to jump on that one. Because they don't want to work for big companies. That is the problem. Look at the unemployment in Prague or in the Czech Republic, right? There's no unemployment because you guys want to do your own startup. You don't want to work for the big dinosaurs. You're probably right, or you're probably wrong, I don't know. But I've been running StartupYard for 4 years, right? 2013, and for the past 2 years, we have big companies banging literally at our doors, asking us to help them get closer to the startup community. This was not the case 4 years ago. To the point that I had to hire someone as part of the accelerator to manage the relationship between the accelerator and the corporation, because I was doing it organically, and I ended up spending more time talking to CEOs of big companies rather than doing my job and helping entrepreneurs. So this is the reason, this is the problem. It has become, as you said, a dream to become a startup, or to do your own startup. And then here I want to say something. It's not a dream. It's, excuse my French, fucking hard to grow a startup. It's really, really difficult. You're going to fail. You know the statistics? You know the statistics. If you start a company, you have 95% chance to fail within the next 15 months. So it's very hard. Still, there is this little dream. There used to be the American dream where everybody in Europe wanted to go to the Silicon Valley, right? And they got surprised that it was not as good as it was. So here's the same thing. It's a bubble. It's a fashion. It's fashionable to say I want to do a startup. It's great. I love it. I love the spirit. But this is the reason why big companies want and need to work with startups, is because the young people do not want to work for big companies. And every time I meet a CEO, they always tell me the same story. They said, we can't attract the young mind. As a result of that, we are no longer creative. We are no longer innovative, so we have to work with those guys because the smartest ones are going to build their own company. So that's the situation everywhere in the world, basically.
Thank you. Robert, I have a question, because it seems like it's employment, the reason to cooperate, and you have AXA has a history of supporting startups. Why not just buy out the startups, like buy out the startup and employ the people? Why to support the ecosystem?
Well, I believe that the two key words are being nimble and scale. So if you are a startup, you have a big advantage is you can be very nimble, you don't have constraints, you don't have internal procedures that make it very difficult to change the world. So you can afford to do very rapidly new prototypes and things. And if you buy a startup and you fully integrate it, you break this spirit of being nimble, being agile. So you need to support them. I mean, AXA, for example, has invested more than $500 million in supporting research, startups, and ventures. So clearly, we want it to be part of our ecosystem because we believe very much that without it, our business model will not evolve quickly enough to follow the trends of the expectations of the customers and so on. But you also need to scale. So if a startup lives in its startup ecosystem without being close with bridges to the corporations, then as Cedric was saying, I mean, you do something nice, but you die. Because you don't reach scale, it doesn't make any sense. I know so many friends who created their startups who was great ideas. And after 2 or 3 years, they didn't fail. They just said, okay, I give up because I cannot guarantee a future for my family. So at the end of the day, if you are able to maintain this laboratory spirit, and you need R&D separated, you need research hubs, you need startup ecosystem to do that, you are not going to make it happen. So I believe there is not a border between startup and corporation. There are a lot of bridges. There must be, and there will be more and more.
Thank you. You mentioned scale, and that's what interests me in iflix. You grow so fast, 700 employees. Are you a startup or are you a corporation? And how you manage to grow so fast?
So I would like to believe that we're kind of in between. So a startup is when you go from 0 to 1, right? So we're at 1 right now, right? And there's a lot more room for us to go forward. One thing the founder and the CEO of iflix always tells me is, Hizam, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. So do what you think that is best in your context. And even if you make a mistake, it's early enough that we could fix it, right? So that's the key. Go fast. You have not gone fast until you crashed. That's another thing that Mark always tells me. Just keep pushing and going and going. So I've been fortunate enough in my life where I've spent a lot of time in the Silicon Valley. I've started a few businesses when I was in my early 20s. Just that environment gave me that ecosystem to do that easily. And I'm starting to see that in Czech Republic and in other countries as well. In those days when it was relatively easy, being there, everybody supports that. Having an idea on a slide even gets you funding. But that has changed now, right? So as Robert was pointing out, the bridge between corporation and startups are super, super important these days. Whatever the startup wants to do, it's got to have some value to somebody, right? Usually it's a customer or it could be a corporation. You find a gap in iflix. iflix is doing great. There's always going to be a gap. There is an opportunity for startups to close that gap, right? It's a win-win situation. You're in a situation where you're passionate, you're able to build something great and close a gap. Take it as a challenge. And a company like iflix sees you that you have closed the gap. It's an opportunity to close the bridge now, right? So that's how I think startup needs to work. One of the things that we heavily believed in was the lean startup. Eric Ries coined that out. And there's a lot of academic methodologies in terms of how you start a business. It's always about customer validation. You want to validate your customer as early as possible. Fake it until you make it. You don't need to build everything because it's going to be a waste if it doesn't become successful. So in the early days, we went out to people and just played a video from a telephone. Would you enjoy a video if it's given to you on your phone? Nothing was built yet at that time. We just downloaded the content on the phone and played it. But what we were trying to do is validating the business, validating the customer. And we would go to the mall and by the way, I mean, it's going to be hard for you to visualize that because I'm talking about emerging market, right? We're talking about Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia. People have never seen or heard about Netflix. So having or showing them content on a smartphone, it's magical, right? So now, when they can watch it without any interruption, with good, high quality, and for a very, very affordable price. So that's the other thing we were discussing a lot in the early days. What would be the right price for a product like iflix? And we concluded it should be $3 US. It just came out of the air, right? We didn't really think too much about it. We wanted to first get or validate the customer, right? And people said, yeah, we will get it. It's cheaper than coffee. It's cheaper than cigarette. I think it should work, right? So then we started building it a little bit, and we were still faking it. Most of it was just faked around behind the scene. But now we've got a proper platform, which we provide to 20 different countries. And we try to work it or customize it to the countries that we work on.
Thank you. You have a lot of experience, and the timing in the emerging markets is great. And I'm using Cedric's words, it's fucking hard to build a startup. But Anne, you managed to replicate the process, and you're creating startups for big companies as a business. I don't understand how you managed to do, because building a startup, and we heard it throughout the day, like you need the passion, experience, you need to work really hard, and you can replicate with many more times. That's what I admire on Creative Dough.
I think it goes back to actually what you were saying, that there is methodology behind building a startup. There is clearly ways to go about it that increases your chances of success, and part of our success is the methodology where we do really rigorous testing of every single idea before we even make a recommendation to move forward and actually build the product. And I think that is absolutely essential and key, and because we are impartial, so we don't make money unless these startups are successful. So we have to be impartial. We don't fall in love with our own ideas. And my experience and looking around the startup world is that startups will often fail because the founders fall in love with their own idea and they believe they are absolutely right, and they continue to try and try and try and try. If I just tweak it a little bit there, tweak it a little bit there, but they haven't actually done their homework, whether there's a market, is there customer need, are people willing to pay money for it? Very often you come up with great ideas, but then it turns out people aren't actually willing to pay for it. They love the idea, but nah, not worth money. And so there's a lot of work that we do before we even start to build the product, and we fake it till we make it as well. We do it very, very cheap for the first phases during the MVP phase, where front end might look good, but if you came to our offices and really saw what goes on the back end, yeah, it sometimes gets very interesting. So we don't spend a lot of money in the initial phases until we absolutely are sure that we can scale the product. So even with Zonky, which I think is one of our more famous startups, the first 6 months we were doing, everything was manual on the back end. And it was only when we knew we could scale it that we fully invested in automating the entire system. And I think these are some of the disciplined approaches that you have to be successful. And the other one is the willingness to fail and to pull the plug very, very quickly. Again, don't fall in love with your own project. If you see that it's not going to work, we go to our clients and say, we don't believe this is going to work, and here's why, so let's just kill it now before we all spend a lot more money. So I think it's a lot of the methodology. It's about being willing to fail, moving fast, not investing into the perfect product before you launch on the market, but rather invest in the perfect product when you have the market and you have customers and you have revenue. Like I said, doing this very, very fast so you minimize your exposure.
Thank you very much. So imagine I followed rigorously the process. I have the passion, I have the experience. I'm building a startup. I'm in B2B and I want to sell to a big company. So I go to Robert after this presentation, or I knock on your door. So what are the things that startups should focus on to be able to sell to a big company? Because sometimes it's the discussion that startups, we don't have an experience with that. We never worked in a big company. So what should we do to impress you?
Two words on my mission. My mission when I arrived here, and all our executives in the company are focused on that now. It's focus and transform. Focus on delivering results, what we call BAU, business as usual. So the existing business model which has already scaled, and we want to continue as long as it works with the existing business model. But we need also to do transformation to be ready for the world of tomorrow. And no one knows exactly how the world of tomorrow will look like, but we have to make a series of bets, big bets, to make sure we are proactive in anticipating the trends and ready when insurance will be something different from what we know today, where the boundaries between products, distribution channels, methods, tools, whatever, will totally disappear. So why I'm saying that? Because I'm answering to your question by saying startups should be, for us, accelerators in our strategy. So they need to understand what we are doing. So we are no longer dinosaurs in the sense that we are willing to change our business model proactively. Otherwise, our business model will kill us. So we want to kill it before it kills us. And I believe that startups should help us to test new things consistently with our strategic orientation. And they should also interact with us in order to adapt it in a nimble way. So big corporations are learning to be agile for the transform part. And we can afford doing that because we have a focus part that is very profitable today. But if we wait, we will have a problem. So we don't wait. We are ready to challenge the existing model with the help of startups, test with prototypes, pilots, whatever, new things. And once we feel that it can be scaled, we go for it. I like also the concept that everyone summarized here, the concept of failure. Because in a big corporation like AXA, people were not trying new things because they were afraid of failing. And you know, in a track record with a HR direction, if you have failed somewhere in your career, you are no longer suitable for a promotion or whatever. So this is no longer true. I mean, our new group CEO and all the company culture is pushing very hard in the sense of failure. If you don't fail, you didn't try enough. So yes, we have to fail, but there are two ways of failing, because you didn't try in the proper way, and you didn't put enough capacity, energy, etc., and this is wrong, or because you really tried, but okay, it was maybe a wrong idea. So we are pushing for a cultural change in order to incorporate the culture of scale on one hand and the culture of transformation on the other, and make these two worlds live in parallel and complementing one another so that they can reach one another at a certain moment when the business model will be really transformed.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add something to that, and we're lucky to have Robert here because he's kind of an exception, and AXA is probably a major exception. So there's one thing that needs to happen is that corporations as well need to change. They're not going to die just because their business model, but they're also going to die because of their internal processes, because they are not equipped to deal with a 3-month-old startup who has no money in the bank, even though he has an amazing technology. I'll tell you a very short story. One of our startups, it's called Tescalab. It's a security company. They have a technology that is pretty unique in the world, and they were selling to a big Czech company. And that big Czech company, the guy who was buying, who needed the technology, loved it, absolutely loved it. And he said, now you need to go to the procurement department to get the contract in place so we can use your technology. So the founder goes to the procurement department, super scary man, and the scary man says, okay, I need to see 3 proposals from 3 competitors from yours, even though what that company is doing is unique in the world. At the end, they could not commercially engage to each other because the corporation was not equipped for that. So we're very lucky to have people like Robert. We are very lucky to have corporations who understand it. However, here in the region, they're not yet aware of that, and they still work in the old model. You know, as long as it's like when you fall from a building. So far, so good. Huh? So it's the same thing. So they need to realize that they all say, oh, we want to work with startup, but they just can't. They're not equipped for it. So they need to change their processes. So some big companies do what AXA is doing. They set up a fund, and they invest, and they take equity into the startup, and that's great, because that's more cash for the industry. Some other big corporations create innovation labs. They give them their own budget, and they do just play. Just go whatever you want to do, just do it, but don't bother with us. Don't try to integrate with our processes because it's not going to work. So there's a huge work from the top of the corporation to understand that they have to change deeply how they work if they want to be able to work with startups. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And do you see it in the clients that you work with?
Absolutely. And we've learned some painful lessons along the way, but our most successful projects and what we do is we are typically kept outside of the organization. And so we are funded from some budget somewhere. Typically our sponsors are C-level or C-1, and we are kept completely outside of the corporate processes. We are governed in the sense that there's a budget, there's only so much money, we have to hit numbers and so on. But we are given complete freedom to build the startup and to move really fast. We don't have to go through the project management office and all of the gates and prove the ROI on a quarterly basis or anything like that. We are kept out. But the advantage is that those same sponsors make sure that we can leverage assets within the corporation. Because a lot of corporations have significant assets or that we can use and expertise that we can use in building the product. So it goes both ways. We're kept out, but we're allowed in and facilitated in, okay, we want to use this, and you have this data, please give it to us. And so that is typically, or I should say that is 99% of the cases. The few times that we've actually worked within an organization, the projects haven't worked out because we ultimately got stalled in the corporate process. And so that's how we manage it, and we found it very effective.
Excellent, thank you. Hizam, so I'm thinking you're growing, the company is growing, and I sometimes hear like a management theory, when you pass some number of people, you need to introduce processes because you need to control. So how you deal with that?
Absolutely, right? I mean, think about it. We're now in 20 different countries with 700 people working. Without process, that's just chaos, right? It's going to be like a zoo. Everybody trying to do what they think is best. So in the early days, I think a company would need to evolve from one stage to another stage depending on where they are, right? So in the early days, we have this term where Mark Britt would say, don't be a victim. You come with a complaint, you're a victim. Be a player and just solve it. Come with a solution and just do what it takes to get it done, right? But now, when you have 700 people trying to be a player, that's just chaos, right? So that needs to change. We introduce small little processes, but it's okay to break them when it's absolutely necessary. So if you break a rule, but then it gives high value, no one's going to complain about it, right? Everyone's just going to be quiet and happy about it. But if you break a rule and then you fail, then people will start noticing. At that point, just ask for forgiveness. You know what? I tried it. I fucked it up. I'm sorry. Move on. I think it's an attitude. It's a culture that you have to build, right? I see that now, right? So everybody that initially started in iflix, they either step away, so we get new people come in who understands growing the business. Like I said earlier, we went from 0 to 1. We're expert at that. Everybody that started the company at the very beginning are expert in that matter. But now that we're at 1, we need new experts to show us how to go beyond the 1. Go to number 2, go to number 3, right? That's a learning process. We're still trying to figure out what is the right process. We don't know. It's a trial and error. Don't get emotional in anything that we do. It goes to HR department, it goes to engineering department, it goes to finance department, right? I'm mostly focused on engineering, so I take care of technology. We have small little processes. These days, Agile is a common thing that we use. Agile, it literally means embracing change, right? If something changes, embrace it and try to find a way that works for it. So I think that's most important. The other thing we try to do is in iflix, although it's starting to become a much larger, big company, we have small, I would like to call it business units. It's small teams that are self-sufficient, they do what they need to do the best, and they are accountable for the outcome of their work. Whether it's engineering, whether it's HR, whether it's finance, whatever it is. Small teams, and the teams should not be bigger than a group of people that can finish a pizza. So it's between 5 to 7 people, right? Depending how hungry you are. So that's the right team. That team needs to be accountable. That team is given a budget, and if they fuck up or they fail, then we try again with a different team, right? It's engineering methodology. Don't get emotional to whatever you're building. Be ready to pivot. But the vision is always there in the horizon. The vision needs to be super clear, but your path towards the vision is always going to change. It has never been, I mean, what I thought yesterday is going to change today.
Thank you.
I would like
yes?
to react on the concept of procedures that certainly are a break to implementing, let's say, new ideas and promoting startups, etc. It's true that in traditional corporations, this was a major issue. And for sure, if I take the example of our company, for example, we are pushing very hard for process simplification, governance simplification, and at the end of the day, I think we need some rules because we are playing with big numbers. So if you make a mistake when you are still a startup, it's okay. If you make a mistake when you are investing millions and millions of euros, then you can create a big damage. So you need some, I wouldn't say detailed procedures, but you need big guidelines and principles that every executive and every business owner should be aware of and fully accountable of. Then the key value is P&L ownership at the end. So there should be clear P&L ownership by area, and people should be autonomous and free to then try new things, try new ideas within the area of competence to make the business model evolve proactively, as I said before, so that we can also avoid the three RFP, three proposal process where you cannot launch things just because it's a unique initiative and no one else exists in the market. So in our case, I would say we know we had a sickness, we are aware of it, we are treating it, but I think we have to be careful also of the opposite sickness when we say, okay, it should be no rule, no procedure, etc., because then it can be quite dangerous when you play with big numbers. I think the reality is a question of balance and of common sense, common business sense at the end of the day. And we know we are sick on that, but we are doing very, very important steps in the direction of simplification. And I'm very happy from what I heard here, because the ideas that failed in other realities, probably in AXA we are much ahead, because we are willing to fail, really. I mean, it's positive, and we are willing to test new things beyond the traditional procedures that become a break often to doing new things.
Thank you. So hearing it, building a startup, having the freedom, changing the big company, changing the culture, it comes down to the right people, the right employees. I assume it's same in Creative Dog. So how to pick the right people for a company? How you do it? Or what do you advise to your startups?
Wow. It's really difficult. Especially here on the Czech market, as we heard, there's very, very low unemployment. And not everybody can thrive in a startup, and not everybody can thrive with the pressure, how hard you work, the fact that there is not necessarily the security. Every day is different. There are no, okay, today I'm going to come in and do this, 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 and this, because chances are by the time you've done this, the rest of the day has changed. And simply not everybody can work in that environment. So we're really careful with who we hire. We rely a lot on word-of-mouth referral. And we have a process at Creative Doc that we call boot camp, where anybody who applies has an initial interview, but then they come and they spend 2 days with us. And they work on an actual project with a team, doing an actual task. The tasks, we try to push people out of their comfort zones. And it's as much for our sake as well as the candidates, because when we've had really bad hiring mistakes, typically it was because the interview was great. And if you're good at interviewing, you can fake anything. But then when they actually come into the environment, they simply could not work in it. So during those 2 days, the candidates themselves get to meet everybody in Creative Doc. They work on a project, they see how we work, what the environment is like. And at the end of the 2 days, we're much more able to evaluate, does this person fit? And the candidate themselves can say, I don't fit. Like for me, a really good result of boot camp is candidates self-selecting out, because that means the process is working. In terms of finding them, so that's the selection process once we actually have the candidates, but finding them, you have to go out and talk to people. And you can find the most amazing people in the most interesting places. So one of our rising young stars was working in a bespoke suit place, measuring people for getting suits done. And one of the partners went in, liked him so much, he came in on boot camp and is now absolutely one of the absolute rising stars with a really good business head, willing to work really hard. But if I had seen his CV, with just, I've worked as a suit salesman, I'm not so sure I would have actually met that person. So a lot of it is as well not focusing on the CV, but actually looking for what does this person want to do, what can they do, what's the potential, and not relying on 2 sheets of paper to do your evaluation. So typically, we will meet with almost anyone who applies to Creative Doc, or at least talk to them. And because gems are found in the most interesting places.
Thank you. Great strategy.
Can I add to that a little bit? I completely agree. We would meet anyone that's willing to talk to iflix, right? And in the Czech market, it's also very challenging because we don't have business here. iflix is not known. Nobody can even go and access it. When you go to www.iflix.com, all it's going to say it's out of country. So it's quite a challenge, and that's something I'm trying to figure out to change. So I will meet everybody. We are an engineering dev center, so most of it's going to be technology driven, do you know how to program, etc. So I don't even look at that anymore because it's pointless. If someone comes to us, they clearly are programmers. So the things that I usually focus on are 4 different things, and in this priority is communication. I'm not talking about how well you speak in English, etc., but how do you convey a message? How do you take your ideas and share it with somebody else? The second thing is attitude, right? I've been working around the world from America to Asia to Africa to the Middle East, now in Czech Republic. Everybody is different. There's so many cultural different. Even the word, what the fuck, means different to different people, right? And I've sucked into that. So I work with Australians in Melbourne, super loud, right? And so loud it actually offends people in KL. It even offended some people in Czech, right? And then you find people in Malaysia who don't say anything. But then they expect you to understand them, right? So I try to understand what kind of attitude this person has in that interview. The third thing is teamwork. I don't believe there's any company out there which has been a one-man show. Right? There may be a visionary, there may be an engineer behind it, but it is a network of people who made it happen. So I really focus on how well people work with other people. Because if you can't work with other people, it's going to be a nightmare, right? And then the fourth thing I look at is leadership. And I'm not talking about titles, I'm not talking about which positions you're going to be at or come from, but it's a personality. So if somebody asks you a question, how do you answer that question? How do you ask a question, right? It goes back to the 4 things that came before that. And the last thing is, of course, the competency. We have a standard technical assessment thing, which is super important, because if you can't program, you just can't work at iflix, or at least in the dev center. So the interview process, it's still a gamble at the end of the day. It's the most expensive gamble you're going to take. You probably spend 2 hours. So you could improve that by having boot camps, which is amazing, because having people come and sit down next to you, you learn so much from them. So what we do is, like, every month we also have what I call the all hands, which ends up being just a huge party. We get all these candidates to come there. And one thing that Mark Britt taught me is honesty hour. And I'm just going to tell you a quick story about that, right? So when you go to a party, you come into the party, say 6:30, 7 o'clock, you start drinking a cocktail, and I would probably ask Cedric, like, hey Cedric, how are you? And he'll be like, I'm fine, I'm good, right? And that's at 7:30. So now we continue drinking, say around 9 o'clock, and I come to Cedric again, hey Cedric, how are you? It's like, yeah, it's all right, it's all good, right? Now at 11:30, and after about 7 or 8 cocktails. Oh yeah, well, that's beyond that. So now I go to Cedric, and Cedric will be like, oh man, you know what, the whole day has been full of shit, everything is not working, blah, blah, blah. That's the time that we want. It's 11:30 honesty. But when you go past that to 12 o'clock, to 1 o'clock, it's like, hey, Cedric, how are you? It's like, man, I love you. Then it becomes useless conversation, right? So we want to bring that 11:30 honesty to all the time. So how do you get that is by really building trust. And how do you build trust is human touch. Right? It's a social economy. We're not robots. You have to connect to people. And connecting to people is the more time you spend with them, the more relationship you build, and then the trust comes. And once you have the trust, you need to have that healthy arguments. Because without trust, arguments are just going to be nasty arguments. And then after that, the results come by itself.
Thank you. Anything you want to add, guys? No?
So I have two things to talk about. So how we select startups, maybe. We look at the people. I always say, just impress me with your natural skills. Most often, the people who come to us are developers. They've had an idea, they saw there was a gap somewhere, and they thought, I can fix that better. So what I'm looking for is, do they have a natural charisma? Do they have the ability to convey the story? Can they communicate? I did in the past make the mistake to take two really introverted, shy developers. They had a good idea what they work. I really like what they're working on, but they were not able to make it. They were not able to grow that as a business. So from an investment perspective, we're looking at people who are able to impress other people. And I'm always wonder, am I going to be ashamed to put those guys in front of Robert if they want to sell to AXA? Am I going to be ashamed to put those guys in front of an investor, or am I going to be proud? So that's how we try to make the selection. And now in terms of hiring people when you have a startup, the first hires are probably the most important one. So I always say, try to find someone who's way more smarter than you. Hire people who are smarter than you. That's one of the things. And also, don't rely on a CV as well. Just put them in situation. So you are now head of sales. What do you do? And this is how I like to run interviews, is in-situation interviews rather than, okay, so from 2003 you did that, tell me what you were doing. Who cares, right? So I like to put people in situation and see how they react, how they approach the problem. There's no right and wrong way, right? But you want to see how they think. So that's my input.
Thank you very much. So the people here on the panel didn't come because of me, they come because of you. So I think now is the time to open up for a question. So I hope you have something brewing in your head. So just raise your hand, I'm looking around.